is the July 18th, 2024 meeting of the Woodbridge Conservation Commission. We're starting at 7:32, and we are first going to do the approval of last meeting's minutes, which were on June 27th. Have people had a chance to look over them? Is there any corrections or anything people want to add? No? Does anyone want to make a motion?
I will make the motion.
Okay.
I will second it.
All in favor? Okay. We don't look like we have any public comment at this moment, so we can move right on to our DEEP presentation with David Tanner. And I think, Ben, you're going to say a few words to introduce who he
I
is.
can say a few things to introduce David.
We're very glad to have you.
Yeah, so everybody, I'd like to welcome David Irvin. So David has a degree in forestry with a minor in wildlife biology from University of Tennessee. He's been a forester for over 33 years, and 28 of those with DEEP. So recently, David did a survey of the Country Club property, and I was lucky enough to walk with him, and he was very knowledgeable and just a fun person to spend 2 hours in the woods with.
It takes a certain kind.
He means that. He means that
And I really
wholeheartedly.
mean it. So DEEP is actually working on a report to assess the habitat of the Country Club property. And so there's not a lot of details about the Country Club property in his presentation right now. But one of the really big findings was that the Country Club property is actually this very rare and important habitat in Connecticut. So it's something called young forest or early successional habitat. There's different terms for it. And this seems like something that the town should consider when they're deciding what to do with the property. So we thought it'd be important to just sort of get this knowledge out to the public. And so David's going to go into it a lot more detail than I ever could. And so please give a warm welcome to David, and I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, thank you. It may be a lot more than any of you want to know, but I'll try to gauge the audience as I go along. But yes, as Ben said, I did walk the Country Club property with him, and also with a DEEP wildlife biologist, Tanner Steeves, who actually is the one who put this presentation together. He put it together for the Master Woodland Manager training program, and it's very appropriate for this. So this is very much a general and broad overview of this type of habitat and its importance in the state. Like Ben was saying, not specific necessarily to here in Woodbridge at the Country Club. But let's see how, I was going to use the arrows. So it's called Managing for Shrubland and Young Forest Wildlife. So early successional habitat, as we've traditionally called it, it can be shrubland, property that's naturally occurring as a shrubland. Oh, that's perfect, thank you. Or you sometimes manage to stay at shrub level. It can be young forest. Simply a mature forest has been cut, young forest is coming in, it's just at maybe seedling, sapling stage. So that serves a similar purpose. And the other kind is just grassland, fields, hay fields. That's something that's really dramatically vanishing in the state, like all of these types, because that's basically farmland, which we're losing all over the place as well. So, really getting down to basics, what is habitat? In a nutshell, it's just the suite of conditions needed for a species to survive and to successfully reproduce. This is what they need. It's a triangle: food, cover, and water. So they need all of these things. So what is shrub? What is shrublands and shrub wetlands? So basically these are areas of high wood stem density with a few general categories. You've got the shrub habitat where these, I'd mentioned these areas persist in places continuously that are usually inhospitable for whatever reason to trees. So it can be coastal sites, it can be alpine, it can be very wet sites or xeric sites. It can be pretty much stable in this form. And this is kind of unusual for a region because the climax vegetation type in our region is actually forest, mature forest. So there is less of this by nature, but there's less now than ever before. So one simple type is just an old field converting to a forest. Now this is something you see a lot at the country club right now. What do? They kept it as grassy, open areas that they maintained for a long time for golf, as golf courses. Then everyone left, they let it go, so it's naturally trying to achieve that long-term climax. It's reverting to forest. And right now it's in the shrubland habitat phase. This is a regenerating young forest. It looked like someone maybe did a cut here, did a heavy timber harvest, and now it's dense with young growth coming in what was the understory. So this is a really good habitat type. And you can see something like this, 2-3 years after a clear cut. It comes back very quickly. It's what we call post-disturbance. It's a little ephemeral, of course, because a forest grows up. It doesn't stay in the shrub phase forever. It needs to be continually remanaged to set back, or you need to go somewhere else to establish that type again. So, from a forestry standpoint, which is sort of my side of natural resource management, doing something like a clear cut, trying to get young growth, is very important for the future of our forests, because right now we have, the state is about 57% forest cover, give or take. It was over 60% when I first got hired, but development is gradually eating away at that little by little. So now it's more like 55, 57%. Now most of that forest averages 100 to 120 years old. Sometimes a little less, sometimes even more. But its average is a little over a century old. And what we need to do is think about forest trees for the future, because those are not going to make it forever. And if we have one Hurricane of 38 incident, like we did in 1938, I think there's going to be a lot of places reset whether we're ready for it or not. And it's kind of scary because, even with the weather this year, they're talking about the possibility of a record-breaking hurricane season in the Atlantic. So it's a little scary because that just increases the odds for us up here. So that's pitch pine on the left. Pitch pine is highly disturbance dependent. It's shade intolerant. It does not like shade at all. As a matter of fact, if you scarify the soil, even bring the duff layer down to mineral soil, that's the best thing you can do for pitch pine. Extremely disturbance dependent. And it's then on the right, you have in that photo, the left-hand side is tulip poplar, the right is red oak. They're also shade intolerant. So when you try to do a clear cut, regenerate the forest, trees like that are of great value really benefit. Oak is a completely disturbance dependent regime too. We had a perfect storm at the beginning of the 20th century. We had rampant wildfires. We had repeated clear cutting for charcoal production. American chestnut suddenly died, and they had no deer to eat it all. So we got a lot of our oak forest that we see and appreciate today came from this era, and we are not seeing that degree of disturbance anymore, so we're gradually losing oak this century to more like black birch and red maple. So why is this important? Why is early successional habitat important? As I hinted, a lot of their habitats are actually in sharp decline. It's important for certain species of animals that depend on this dense cover for hiding and for nesting. And it's a good food resource. There's certain herbaceous plants and soft mast, like blackberries, raspberries, that you're only going to see at a certain phase like this, and a lot of tender woody stems to browse on. So these are some young forest poster species. Anyone know what the bird is on the left? That is a real bird. It's a woodcock. You ever heard of that? They're actually a game bird. They are early successional dwellers. I worked in state lands for many years before coming to this program and had a lot of success stories and places where I've done some forest management getting woodcock back. In particular, if you do regeneration cuts near wetlands or bodies of water, that really favors woodcock. So the other one is New England cottontail. And we're going to be talking about those guys a little bit more later on. Oh my goodness, it has an animation. I didn't even realize that. That looks like a whippoorwill on the upper left and an indigo bunting on the right.
Wow.
And I think that's a wood turtle, and then the lower right is a box turtle. And a monarch butterfly, look at that, and a grouse.
Yeah.
So there are over 50 wildlife species of greatest conservation need in the state that depend on this phase of habitat. As a matter of fact, here is a long list of some of these. These species of greatest conservation need were identified in our state's state's wildlife action plan. This is something the federal government encourages states to do, and we've done the same thing in forestry. We have a forest action plan that is renewed, completely rewritten every 10 years, and then at the 5-year mark, it's revisited and reevaluated a little bit on a more minor scale. So we have a forest action plan, and Tanner is trying to tell you about his wildlife action plan, recognizing these species of greatest conservation need. It's a pretty long list of all kinds. So some of the birds, this is a list of some of the birds that are basically shrubland obligates. The word obligate means they absolutely depend on it. So you do not have habitat, you do not see these species, is basically it. Some of them require bigger openings, bigger areas of early successional habitat than others. They're very much, birds in particular, are very much specialists sometimes. In fact, some birds or even specialize in certain parts of the canopy where they feed or nest. You'll have birds that are ground nesters or ground foragers. You have them that are maybe midway up. Some of them are upper shrub nesters, like in mountain laurel. You might see a little bird nest in mountain laurel sometimes. Some are right at the tops of trees, like I've done management specifically for cerulean warblers, which is a species of international concern, and they like big, crowned, open-topped white oak and sugar maple in particular. So we look for those big trees, make a big opening around them so that you have a scattering of big trees, a lot of young growth coming up in the understory. Because cerulean warbler will nest something like 75 feet up in those crowns, but they'll forage all the way on the ground in the shrubbier habitat. So.
Interesting.
So some other species, there's eastern towhees, field sparrows. I saw the indigo bunting in that last slide. That's one of them. Prairie warbler and white-eyed vireo. Just to name a few. Whippoorwill, yellow-breasted chat, golden wing warblers. Those are more. And those are actually all species of greatest conservation need. Herps and inverts. Inverts are invertebrates, of course. So here's some reptiles and some insects that depend on this phase of habitat. And some mammals. Interestingly enough, deer and turkeys Some people think of them as forest animals, but they're actually edge animals. They don't live, they're not deep forest dwellers. They basically live on the edge of forested areas where there's fields and shrubs and openings for foraging. So how do we know some of these species are actually declining? Well, long-term monitoring, research, and observation, which they actually do actively in the Wildlife Division and also in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So here's an example with some actual data, some actual numbers over time. This is the blue-winged warbler, which is always interesting because it's a very yellow bird, but they call it the blue-winged warbler. Well, this table shakes very easily. Sorry about that. This is a breeding bird survey. I'm not positive what the y-axis on the left there is. I think it may represent breeding pairs of birds observed. So over time, you've got a sharp decline. Prairie warbler, the same thing. A decline over time. It's pretty consistent. Eastern towhee. That's another example. So these are species, interestingly enough, right here, that actually nest in older saw-timber forests, mature forests. That's where they actually nest, but they use young forest areas. And this is something just some years ago biologists weren't really clear on. You know, we always thought of everything as being cut and dry. You've got the early successional species. You've got the mature forest species. Often doesn't work that way. Many species will use multiple kinds of habitat during different life phases, but each one is just as critical to them for whatever reason. So you've got the worm-eating warbler here. That's the black-throated blue warbler, which throws you off. I don't know if anyone's a birder here, but if you ever listen to bird song and try to hear us for one of those cerulean warblers I was talking about, the black-throated blue sounds very similar and can easily throw you off. So sometimes birds will be raised in an older forest, but when it's time for them to learn survival skills, when they're fledging, they're learning how to forage on their own, avoid predators, things like that, then they'll often go to these smaller pole size or even sapling and dense underbrush type habitats. So it's pretty interesting. It also adds to the importance of these diverse types of habitats when you find out that, hey, many of them use these areas. New England cottontail. At one time, all over southern New England and even part of northern New England had New England cottontail. And now they're fairly limited to what you see circled there. And as you see, there's quite a bit of that in Connecticut. We're kind of a hot spot for it, Connecticut and Rhode Island. It's the only native rabbit in New England. Most of you, if you've ever seen a rabbit in your backyard, it's probably not one of these. It's probably eastern cottontail, which is actually an invasive species. But eastern cottontail is more effective at watching for predators and spends more time in open areas like that because of it. New England cottontail likes areas that are so dense you don't even want to go there. So they're very much a shrubland, early young forest habitat dweller. So it's just a real quick one. It is hard to distinguish easterns from New England cottontails. Sometimes the easterns have sort of a little white spot up on their head, but there's no guarantee. The New England cottontails actually have shorter ears, and their eyes are set a little more forward, and they're something like 50% smaller than the eyes of an eastern cottontail. So easterns, their eyes are set on the side of their heads a lot, and they have bigger eyes. So they can see predators coming in open areas a little bit better, and that gives them an edge in those type of areas. Basically, to make sure we have New England cottontail, it's DNA verification. And that's some of the stuff I just mentioned to you. This was a species of federal concern and almost became a federally endangered species, which everyone, including DEEP, was trying to stop. And one of the ways we did it was to proactively participate in a program, both that was state and federal cooperative, to create habitat and try to get more and more of them so that it didn't have to become endangered. Because if this was ever endangered, there would be all kinds of things you couldn't do. And not just on the natural resource management side, also on developing and just about anything else you're going to do with your land. And we didn't really want to see that. These are some focus areas. I've had New England cottontail success in some of my state forests too in the past. This is one of them. This is Wyandotte State Forest. This is a case where I actually wrote an entire forest management plan because wildlife asked me to, for the sake of New England cottontail habitat creation. This is in Warren, in northwest Connecticut, and basically New England cottontail occurred on farmland right next to our state forest. So therefore, very close to that boundary, we started creating a series of clear cuts and other regeneration cuts and try to create habitat for them. And they've been doing live trapping and monitoring out there, and it's been working. It's been a success story. So primary cause, of course, of decline of these species obviously is loss of habitat. One of them is, residential development and commercial development continues to grow. This is where also, when it talks about quantity, quality, and connectivity, that's where fragmentation comes in. Because sometimes you can take a small acreage for development, but it has a much bigger impact than just the acreage that's actually developed. For instance, we have birds that require 20 acres or more, larger areas of early successional habitat. And you can develop an area that might just be 4 acres of that 20. But if it's right in the middle of it, it breaks apart that entire area, and then guess what? All of a sudden you don't have 20 acres, you've got a couple of parcels left over that are not even 10 acres each. So it's all about the connectivity, it's all about the quality of what you've got. And fragmentation is a big problem. I mean, I get it. I don't necessarily want to live 6 inches from a neighbor either. We all like to have, a nice home with a nice yard, maybe some buffer, some woods to help give us some privacy. But there is a cost to that, though. That's something that we deal with a lot. So a lot of power line right-of-ways these days have actually become habitat. The Wildlife Division coordinates directly with Eversource, for instance, to give them, to provide them with focus areas and best management practices for managing their right-of-ways. And it's for New England cottontail, but that New England cottontail, in reality, is just one indicator species. If you create something for New England cottontail, you're also creating something for many migratory birds. So it just multiplies. But that's been the basis, and Eversource has pledged to follow that. And anytime there's right-of-way management on state land, Eversource has to follow our rules. Now the difference is when it passes through private land, they're asked to do the same. And frankly, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. It sort of depends on who manages it. They're a big bureaucratic company probably like the government, like us. So things happen. But they're doing a better job of that these days. So here's a graphic that illustrates the process of forest succession. So a young forest will grow older over time without the repeated disturbance or interventions. And it shows sapling, mid-successional, late successional. So the first 5 years, not much, but over time, yeah. I mean, by the time it's 50 years, you've got small sawtimber-sized trees here in Connecticut. Climax forest, it says 150 to 300 years. There are not many tree species that actually live to 300 to 400 years here, but there are a few, like white oak. Some of them easily live that long, but it's But older forests, old growth type forests, are really not about just old trees. It's actually an ecosystem condition. It's a condition across the entire forest. And it does involve disturbance. It does involve some young forest being there. Even involves identifying specific kinds of lichen and mosses and stuff like that that comes with them. But that's another story. Just the word climax for climax forest, like you see here, is something you might not see in a slideshow produced by forestry anymore. Because it's kind of controversial, because forests, we know, are dynamic. They're not at all static. There's always growth and change happening in the forest environment. So climax kind of implies that it reaches a point and just stops, and that's where we are. This is the pinnacle. But it really never works that way in nature. So, in demonstrating the overall loss of the habitat trends, there's been a loss of timberland by 11 to 12% of the acreage. But the young forest component of this timberland is decreased much more dramatically, by 83%. And this is largely because of, the forest is maturing. Some of it is just a natural part of the forest that we've left alone. So, one of the legacies of past effects of past land use, invasive plants, and non-native things like earthworms, increased deer browse, all of that. These are other reasons our forests have grown over time to be kind of a little more of a monoculture than we would like to see. It all happened around the same time. If you look at the picture on the left, that's nice and thick. It's pretty good cover. If you look at the one on the right, not really at all. And I think most of us enjoy open park-like forests and woodlands. You can walk, you can see a long way in them, but it really doesn't do anything for wildlife. Because if you look at the forest floor and the picture on the right, there's really nothing to speak of growing there to eat. There's certainly nothing to hide under unless you're really small. So the historic extent of young forest and shrubland habitat was 10 to 15% across the landscape. So currently we have about 3% of our undeveloped space in young forest or shrubland. So instead of 10 to 15, it's more like 3%. So you can say, depending on the study, it's up to 5%, with about 2% of that grassland, 3% of that shrubland. So there's been a lot of things that naturally changed and influenced the forest in the past. Fire is probably one obvious one that has done that. If you look at that graph, it's hard to believe, but in 1915 rather, we had about 45,000 acres of forest fires in the state in 1 year. That was about the peak. And frankly, the whole beginning of the century for the first 20 to 30 years was widespread wildfires with very little mechanism of control like we have today. So we didn't have the fire trucks, the fire departments that were trained in this. We didn't have a lot of the infrastructure that we do now, even with some of the roads that we use to access these areas. So it's a much different world now, but fire was a real impacting source for the forest back then. Hurricanes, which I mentioned, ice storms could do damage. Beavers, that's another one that comes to mind. Beavers naturally flooding the landscape. It's also believed Native Americans did quite a bit of clearing of their own, and if not, they often would do fires. I was going to call it a controlled burn, but I'm not so sure how controlled it was then. But they did do a lot of burning. So we're behind the 8 ball on that a little bit. So this will get to be a little bit repetitive of what we just said. Move right along a little bit. New England Cottontail, which I mentioned before, was a huge government cooperative between states and federal government. And I mentioned that already about the possibility of becoming endangered. So, New England cottontails do require large patches of dense cover for food and cover and protection from predators. Small patches become what we call ecological sinks. The rabbits may come to use it, but they get eaten. Bigger is better. The same goes with many of our migratory bird species. Bigger is better. We often get accused of wanting to do things like clear cut that the public doesn't like to see, but the Wildlife Division is actually asking us to do that kind of thing more and more without our own thoughts on the matter. So wildlife is very much in favor of that kind of work. So the rabbits don't disperse very far, so you have to have a source population nearby. They're not like birds that fly and can see stuff from a long distance and land and use the habitat. They don't go too far. This is an actual initiative that I hinted at earlier. All started with New England Cottontail. And this is basically what they do, is conduct outreach to help justify this, do site assessments, write plans, and assist landowners, in this case, of course, it's private landowners, through NRCS, which is a process that often will get landowners grants or cost sharing, at the very least, for doing habitat work. So, diversifying the forest landscape, increasing the extent of young forest habitat. These are major, major goals of ours. Again and again, I can say that. And I probably have tonight. This is an interesting graph because it kind of shows existing conditions across the state versus what we would refer to as the desired conditions. Right now, about 80% of our forest is around even-aged. Young forest, if you look at the grassland versus the young forest here, it's 2% and 3%, as I mentioned earlier. Not going to do much about water unless we start building more dams all of a sudden. So that's going to stay at 5%. So one of the overarching goals is to try to break up some of this even-aged forest and start developing uneven-aged forest, which has been identified as a way to help simulate development of old-growth forest, except through management and do it in a little bit faster. And of course, we'd like to have a good 10% of early successional habitat, if at all possible. That's a lot of work and a lot of cutting, though, to get there. So I won't mention too much about this, but I have about 3 slides here on grasslands because it is a distinct type of habitat that's not a shrubland or a young forest. It's maintained in grasses. And usually when I say grasses, I'm talking about native warm season grasses, like little blue stem, big blue stem, and there's about 4 or 5 grasses that are really considered. And what they do is over winter, they pretty much stay intact and stay tall like this and not flattened. And so then in spring you have a lot of dead grasses. And one of the best ways to manage that is to burn it. And we've done a lot of prescribed fires in areas that look just like this. These are some grassland birds that are pretty dependent on that. You got bobolink in upper left, Savannah sparrow in the right. Down, of course, lower, you got meadowlark, and then right in the middle of American kestrel, which is a very small hawk. This is where we're doing a prescribed fire in an area like that. They burn very hot, very quick, and they're done. And the good thing about fire, as opposed to just mowing, you don't have to really use the herbicide or anything to kill woody stems like that. You burn it off every few years, knock it back again to the grasses, and the grasses actually come back thicker than ever before. You could come to this place in the middle of the summer after a burn like this, and you'd never know it happened unless you looked really close at the ground underneath the growing grasses. So these are things we do and things we don't do. And this is kind of in response to a lot of public feedback and social media complaints and stuff like that. Not that people complain much on social media, but it has happened, I've heard. So we basically pick sites to the most benefit of target species, like the best, it's like, best trees for the best site, that kind of thing. So try to select sites where the trees are already relatively poor health, maybe poor value, just generally not well stocked. We'll pick areas that make sense to do regeneration cuts. So you can leave select trees as a seed source. You have to treat the invasive plants. It's kind of a policy of ours. So if we ever go out and do active management in the woods, we hit the invasives first. And then we check and check again after the work is done to make sure the invasives aren't coming back. So, just reading my own slide here. Maintain existing areas suitable for, yep. Things we don't do. Deforestation and land use conversion. We don't clear cut large portions of the state. It's very selective and it's very well planned. We tend to not cut during the breeding or the nesting season. Now that is one point of contention where the Wildlife Division does not do anything during bird nesting season. Forestry still does to some extent, unless there's a listed bird species nearby. And one reason is because with climate change and weather issues, we are just beside ourselves trying to find a time when you can even operate anymore. Used to depend on winters for frozen ground conditions. We don't have that much anymore. And then if you're dependent on summer to have a dry period, sometimes the summer may be a washout as well. So if we have any dry period where you can operate, we kind of have to jump on it. And the Wildlife Division does accept that because they feel like there's a greater benefit of creating larger habitats than the concern of possibly losing individual birds and stuff that may be in there using it. But on the whole, if it's listed, we're not going to bother with it. One example is Housatonic State Forest in Sharon. That's a hot spot for rattlesnakes, which are state endangered. So we are creating habitat for them in the wintertime, but in the summer, early fall, when the snakes are active, we're not going to be in there doing anything, just to protect the individuals. So just a little aside, I don't know if that's helpful or... So, this is just a timber stand map. You know what a stand is to foresters? It's just an area. You know how humans are. We like to categorize and group everything so that we can manage it with our little minds. But in reality, what we do is we kind of group areas of forest of similar character. So these stands are probably areas that are about the same age and the same cover type, the same species. So you might have an oak stand that's 100 years old. You might have an oak stand that's 25 years old next to it. That's a different stand because it's a different age class. And you might have hemlock and pine next to that. So yet another stand. So that's all that map means. Some different equipment in operation. Commercial and non-commercial. At Wyandotte, where I showed you the picture of the clear cut with the bunny there, Wildlife agreed to do the non-commercial areas by rolling, chopping, brush cutting, that sort of thing, because they have federal funds to support that kind of work. We don't. So the foresters, which in this case was myself, agreed to take care of any commercial timber harvest in there. So we had a big clear-cut area that was half non-commercial that wildlife had funding for, and the other part was something that had some valuable timber on it that we were cutting, so I marketed that. It was very much a cooperative. So these are things that we always consider, leaving snags, cavity trees, slash retained on the site, coarse woody debris all on the ground. That makes valuable cover, if nothing else, for reptiles and for small amphibians, especially if there's vernal pools in the area and ponds. These are kind of things that when I send your official forest report out from the day of our site walk, there's going to be actually either handouts or there are going to be links to specific information about things like this and how to improve the habitat by making brush piles, by leaving snags, by, in some cases even creating cavities. Although a lot of times in nature, they do a pretty good job of that on their own. This is always kind of fascinating. You got a fresh cut on the left, gradually growing up, and after about 20 years, you see what's on the far right of that group of four. And notice something really significant again is that after 20 years, it's pretty open in the understory. There's a lot of stems there, but you can walk through it, you can see through it. And that's why early successional species don't use that anymore. So they go to a point where it's about 15 years, it peaks, and quickly starts to decline as far as usefulness. By 18 to 20 years, early successional species are no longer using that like they did before. So you either have to have a shrubland that's maintained that way as continuous shrubland, or you have to have a program of regenerating different parts of a forest on the landscape gradually, one section at a time. So you might have an area that's just been cut, you might have an area that's 20 years old, you might have an area that's 40 to 50 years old, and you could have 120 years old saw timber over here that's not been in the mix yet. So gradually you go around and regenerate with a rotation period of like 120 years or more. Yeah, theoretically you would go around the whole thing and have started over again. Foresters usually push the non-continuous version as much as possible, because when we get good quality young trees established, we don't want to see wildlifers going in there and cutting it back again. We'd like to see them grow up and hit a new area. Ten to 15 years old. Controlling invasives. There's different ways to do that. Mechanical and hand pulling is one. I've hurt my back that way. Propane torches are a good one, but it's slow and very fuel heavy. So you'll be carrying a propane tank on your back and firing for instance, one thing it really works well on besides stiltgrass is on Japanese barberry. You'll go to the base of the clumps and just basically fire around the base of the clumps until you're fried its phloem. So basically it kills it. But it takes a long time if you've got a few acres to hit. And herbicide is probably the quickest way. I know there's a lot of opposition to use of herbicides in any way anymore. When we've done it, it's been a spot treatment, very, very species-specific spot treatment. And more often than not, what we'll do is cut a shrubby or woody stem and then just kind of paint on the herbicide on the base of the stump, well, around the top of the stump, and then it sucks that down into the root system of just that plant. So that's probably the most common way that I've done it. Just make sure it doesn't sprout back, that's all. American woodcock has its own focus areas, just like New England cottontail does. It's a very funny bird. This is another case where, look at this, it requires open fields, it requires rich, moist soils with a young forest, and sometimes it'll even go into the larger older forest. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, it's been a lot lately. If been in forestry, and or even if you just watch the news occasionally, local news. I mean, we've had a real run of invasive insects and disease issues in the last few years, and it's kept us on our toes. Of course, we lost the ash, and now the beach is starting to look not far behind, unfortunately. It's always something. We had the spongy moth. If anyone doesn't know, spongy moth is the new name for gypsy moth. It's the same thing. Yeah. So we have my former co-workers in Northwest Connecticut are in the process of marking about 800 more acres of salvage right now, just from oak trees dying from their attack. And their attack ended in 2022 up there, but the aftermath is sometimes a little slow to catch on. And then what happens is when the trees are weakened, you get natives attack them also. So there's a lot of trees that we thought were going to make it from spongy moth are actually dying now from two-line chestnut borer, which is native, but they hone in on those stressed trees and attack them, finish them off. It's always something. Now this is one of only 2 photos in this program that's from the country club. So this is one I took, just a random shot of dense early successional habitat, and you can see why a rabbit or a bird looking for a refuge might have a good time in there. This is another shot where it's kind of more of a grassy area there in between. And one thing I discussed with Ben when I was out there is how we might want to consider getting rid of some of these hedgerows of trees if they're not really part of a forest. It might be better to take those down, because right now they're almost fragmenting a certain type of habitat by running that hedgerow through it. And as Tanner was explaining, I think when we were out there, birds a lot of time when they're honing in on habitat, a place to land as they migrate every year, they see everything horizontally as they fly. If they see something like this in the background, to them, that's not big enough. That's not habitat. If you take that down, you could double or triple the size of it all of a sudden. And it'll be something that they're more likely to land and to actually use. And another thing is hedgerows like that are randomly out in the middle of this type of habitat often serve as cover for predators. So a lot of times if you have ground nesting birds, for instance, predators will use these refuge areas to hide themselves. And it's a lot easier for them to find and to attack nest in these much smaller areas on either side of the hedgerow. So that's just one of many management thoughts that's probably going to come your way. That was the other picture that's from the country club. So I know, not dramatic, but it's a couple. So I want everyone to know that there's a bunch of brochures and flyers on that back table. I encourage anyone here to please take some. Take multiple copies if you want, if you think someone else you know might be interested in reading about this. I'm going to leave all that material here, if that's still okay. I don't mean to give you something to clean up, but if you want to put it in brochure racks in the town hall or in the library, as we talked about, that would be great. That would probably be a good idea. They're there to be handed out, read, used by the public. So that's absolutely fine. So this was produced by Tanner Steves and a couple of other biologists originally. And that's my contact information. I'm out of the Marlboro Eastern District Headquarters office for DEEP. Got a couple of phone numbers up there and an email address. So hopefully you can read that. If not, let me know and I can get you anything you want. Ben knows how to reach me. With that in mind, then, I hope that was clear enough, not absolutely overkill for your purposes or interest, but I appreciate you asking me here, and I will see if you have any questions.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
David, a couple of things, just one question. You mentioned earthworms and you said the word invasive. Is earthworm an invasive?
Yeah, well, one thing is made the media a lot in recent times is those invasive jumping worms,
Oh, those I know.
which yeah, they're unbelievable. But they're growing and they're spreading, and a lot of times they are in the same type damp soils that you find a lot of the invasive plants like barberry. And when the jumping worms work together with barberry, I mean, that just decimates the organic layers of soil. It's just nothing there left. But any earthworms, to tell you the truth, that we have are technically, they're not native.
They're not native.
We brought those over here. Yeah, you didn't have earthworms back
Yes.
before Europeans.
You use disturbance in terms of forestry. Is that like hurricanes, fires, and things of that nature? Is that what you mean when it just kind of levels
Yeah,
an area,
yeah.
that type of thing?
Anything that takes trees down, changes the landscape, changes the age class or the habitat. Yeah, anything. And yeah, ice storms, wet, heavy snowstorms, hurricanes, tornadoes that may pass through. So that's a smaller scale disturbance usually. And fire, anything that will do that. Beaver flooding.
And man, right, people.
And, oh, absolutely, people, that goes without saying, yeah. Yep, so what we do is, a lot of times in forestry, we focus on these, what we call the disturbance regimes. Ecosystems and cover types out there that depend on some kind of disturbance, small scale or large scale, and we kind of mimic that in forest management and habitat work. That's really what we're doing. And we're trying to diversify with humans in mind. So I always like to add that because we're here. I know there's a lot of people that don't seem to like that we're here, but we are, and I don't think we're going anywhere. So what we have to do is manage for as much diversity and as much habitat and forest cover as we can get away with in light of people being here and in light of people having impacts.
And,
So-
and when
Yeah, I
you're
have
trying, I'm sorry, go on, Diana.
Oh,
I've
no,
had enough time.
on that, because I've been writing down questions. But on that, I was curious about it. You had mentioned something about, like, bigger is better for the New England cottontail. And I was just curious, like, what is a minimum threshold? Like, what's an ideal size for that?
that is a good question.
Sorry.
I'm sure Tanner could spit out a lot faster, but I honestly, I think it's like 20 to 30 acres and more
Okay.
is what it is. Yeah. Like I think we have places where there might be between 60 and 80 acres cut for them, and that's considered excellent, of course.
Yeah.
But thinking of,
So sorry. I was curious, how does this species make the list? Like the cottontail, and what does that mean if a species is on the list?
it means that there is a protection by the law to impact those. You know, whether it means impacting the animal directly or its habitat that's been identified. If they have occurrences there, if they're actually known to occur somewhere. There's different levels too. Like here in the state, there's what we call endangered, of course, that's the highest. Threatened, and then there's species of special concern. And sometimes special concern species are not very rare necessarily. It's just that they occur in very specific habitats, and those habitats may not be widespread. They may just be in certain areas that you will find it, certain conditions. So they have their own occurrence threshold or population threshold that puts them in those categories.
Okay.
But I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And it really depends on the wildlife species too. You can have thousands of one species and it can be just as endangered as another one that may only have something like 150 known occurrences. Because it depends on the wildlife species size and how many numbers they normally, what the density is normally for them. So anyway, yep.
Would, I'm curious if you identified, or in the report you'll have identified specific areas like vernal pools and ponds, which might have more rarity even than, or
Yeah, we'll mention it. Yeah,
If that's the
I know
case.
that there's a pond out there, and
yeah.
that'll get mentioned.
And if we're trying to maintain a habitat that has some shrubland, Does does the forestry department help us do that if we wanted to have a program with you guys so we could set something up possibly? That you-
Yeah, there is funding for things like that. And we're going to provide information on, Tanner and I both plan to provide some information on how you can get assistance for something like that. Like, I know it's a little harder for town-owned property because you probably don't qualify for the same things that private landowners and even land trusts do. Like NRCS that has all the cost sharing and the grant programs, I don't think you qualify if it's town-owned. So it's a little more limited, but we'll see what we can.
So that's
figure out
interesting.
for you.
So like last year, we had a property come up that was available for the town to purchase back again, but then when we determined who would manage it, our
Oh.
recommendation was like the land trust, like, you know, so that, you know, they're taking ownership, you know, because the land trust does a great job of conservation, obviously. So
Okay.
when we are considering properties like that, it behooves us to consider, you know, the
Having a
land
land
trust
trust.
because of not only their ability to conserve the land, but also their availability to get resources
Maybe, yeah.
to continue.
As a nonprofit, you know, and some of those land trusts really generate a lot of interest, local interest, and a lot of volunteers really
Interesting.
get involved with them.
Okay.
And now, I'm sorry, you had a question a while back.
I know.
Well, it had to do with this whole thing of doing the clear cut, the managed clear cut for
Mhm.
the bunnies.
Oh, for the bunnies?
Cottontails,
Well, the
Peter.
cottontails.
Yeah.
But when you do that, don't you take away all kinds of things for other species?
Yeah.
And what happens to them?
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, anything you do has an impact on something else. That's for sure. I've always been a proponent of the idea that even setting aside land just to leave alone for nature to take its course, for old growth, that is also management. That's a decision. That's a conscious decision you're making to not go in there and do anything. Maybe to the detriment of something else. You know, I don't know. That's always the case. But the thing with the early successional habitat, like for the bunnies, is there's just not that much of it out there across the landscape. So we're trying to just establish something that's becoming more rare. Now, you know, you could clear cut in the middle of a 4,000 acre state forest, and it doesn't matter so much if most of that forest is mature. That rest of that forest is already providing for those other species that use it. If that makes any sense.
Yes, it does indeed.
Yeah. So we're just trying to diversify things, break things up, and try to reach targets for like the 10% of this, you know, 15% of that age class and stuff. Yeah.
You use,
Oh, sorry, who's go ahead, you had your hand
you
up
use
first.
clear cutting as a management tool, you know, as a
Yeah.
process. And it's, I've always known clear cutting, always
Yeah.
regarded clear cutting as not good.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, I know.
And,
Yeah, it's
There's
got to be, for a purpose, it's got to be well planned.
Right.
And it's not land use conversion. As long as you leave it in forest, you know, it's still forest. It may be a young forest, it may be a ground at age 0, but it's still forest land.
but
If
is
you develop it,
there,
it's gone.
based
So-
on what you're saying, is there a benefit, for example, if you have a large swath of mature forest, to consider using that, or to consider doing something to enable the shrub land to
Yeah.
Exist and-
to
That's-
dedicate some of
that's
it for
their
that,
whole-
you know?
Yeah, yeah,
Their whole purpose.
we often do. I had a couple of state forests where there were areas in it where the wildlife division would just keep setting it back again. They
Right.
would take
So-
the same site and mow it back, brush hog, forestry mow, you know, sort of thing. And it would maintain it at that level. It's a lot easier for us, for the most part, with almost no budget, is to just do it as part of natural forest regeneration that we want to produce anyway. So we'll cut an area and trying to regenerate a section of forest, and that kind of serves temporarily as that shrubland. It grows out of it. What we need to do is keep making more of them in the landscape. So it's sort of a compromise with with that.
And you said the NRCS assists more with property owners than necessarily town-owned property. The forest, what you do, I mean, that's not the case as far as what you do as far as working with towns is concerned.
Yeah.
For that kind of expertise, that advice, that direction, that assistance
We're
in
gonna
regard
give
to
you-
trying to manage it.
Lots of ideas, contact information, links, attachments, things like that as part of the report. Our program in service forestry is intended to be an education and informational opportunity. It's meant to be advice for landowners to get them started. It's basically to launch a process of management. So even if we approach a private landowner that wants to do a timber harvest, for instance, and he has 150 acres of land, I can come out and give him an idea if he's got the value for it, if he's got the access for it, operability for equipment, all kinds of things. But I can't really do a management plan for him. That would be for a consultant forester to do, and we would make that kind of recommendation in how to reach those people. Does that make any sense? Is that answering your question?
Thank you.
Yeah.
You'll include recommendations on possible consultants or where to find consultants
Yeah.
for forest
Oh, yeah.
management?
Yeah, we can do that. And there'll be recommendations of my own and Tanner's own in there too. You know, just be suggested. These are ideas for your property. These are how you can enhance your objectives for habitats, for instance.
Will you also include in the report things that you found of interest in the property too?
I usually report like all the tree species I found, all the invasive plant species I found, some of the herbaceous and shrub species.
Speaking of the invasives, I loved when you said you hit the invasives first, and what would be the next steps for the town? Because believe it or not, we have some invasives in town. Barberry.
It's true, I've seen it.
You know, you come out at the end of February and it's the only thing you see that's green,
Oh,
right? So, like, how can we work with you, or what are the recommendations for the town if we were really looking to try to, you know, hit our invasives first as a step in the right direction?
Yeah. Well, I'll let you know. I may even recommend some contractors that do herbicide and mechanical work for invasives. I mean, there's contractors out there that's all they do.
Really?
Yeah.
Invasives,
Wow.
undesirable plants. In fact, one of them is right in Ranford, All Habitat Services.
Oh.
That's what they do. There's vegetation control services, I think is what it's called, up in Massachusetts. They do the same thing. They get all over New England.
Yeah.
Pretty big crew. There's some individual operators out there too that do that kind of thing. It's basically just one guy with a backpack or something, but it takes a while.
Can I ask a question about, like, how does the state work with local gardeners, landscapers, you know, other supply areas to make sure that they are not selling and distributing?
Oh, jeez. That's a whole can of worms right there in itself. Can of invasive worms. There's a lot of invasive species that are illegal to sell from any nurseries, but some of the species on the invasive list are still legal to sell. And frankly, that's because the nursery industry here has a pretty strong lobby, and they've lobbied for that, like Japanese barberry and winged euonymus, which is the same thing as burning bush.
Yeah.
Those are two, to my knowledge, that you can still sell, even though they're some of the worst invasives we have, and we don't like that. But that's what it is, you know, lobbying the legislature so that they can make exceptions on the law.
Yeah, I think the barberry's pretty
Yeah,
bad around here.
yeah, but it's just something that more and more we're just having to tackle no matter what we do. Believe it or not, I had thousands of forested acres in northwest Connecticut, interior areas that really didn't have invasives. And when we managed, they still didn't have invasives after we left there. We were fortunate. A lot of people don't believe there's still areas like that because they really grow everywhere around where you're developed. You know, they particularly are around human development and areas that have been abandoned after development or abandoned farmland or lot of times they focus on wetland areas too. They really like those wet
Yeah.
sites. But,
I think that's one thing that sort of drives folks crazy a little bit is, want to get out there and use like the trails and
oh, yeah.
hike on the land and enjoy the beauty and a lot of the invasives have just run over parts of that property and it's,
Oh, I know. And they really would in a property like that was a country club and just suddenly abandoned. It's going to happen. Most of them love that full sunlight. They love that disturbance, and if it's an area that has some form of repeated disturbance in there, that just encourages them out all that much more.
okay.
Yeah, I know.
And we're
a battle
looking
you
at
can't
doing, we're looking at, possibly planting some native shrubs.
Yep.
Right in there to, combat what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
We want to make sure we're not just giving them a haircut so they grow, bigger and stronger in the next year, but, that we're actually making some progress, chipping away at it.
I mean, I have to say, these invasive plants, we're not going to get rid of them. They're never going to go anywhere, as far as the state is concerned.
Yeah.
So what you really need to do is just focus on management objectives and make sure they don't interfere with management objectives. So if you want to focus on an area for habitat or for new forest growth, focus on that area and get the invasives out of there. And just know that they still exist out there. There's still seed banks. There's going to be, because it's just an impossible task to do except in these focused areas. And frankly, if you have an area that doesn't have many invasives right now, just a scattering of them, it's good to attack those areas so that they don't get a firm establishment
That
there.
would be a key.
Really attack them before they take over everything. But some areas are just hopeless. Just want to napalm them.
Thank you.
No, thank you very much.
Does anyone have any
So,
additional questions? Mr.
So
Bennett?
it's a little maybe out of scope, but
okay.
when you have a big property and you're looking at it for development or whatnot, how do those developments typically handle invasives and these types of situations?
Oh, the
Like,
development itself?
Yeah. Do they do anything or they just,
I don't know. Some of them, they try to build into the landscape, and then the roots get compacted, and all the trees die and fall over anyway, and then they have to start all over again. Sometimes they take everything off that landscape, and if they don't have clean fill and clean gravel and stuff that they bring into the site for the construction process, sometimes there'll be invasive seeds right in that material. They'll start getting Japanese knotweed coming up because of the material they brought in from somewhere else. They're just relentless.
they're never going to make an effort to fix it, they'll just.
Yeah, I mean, and sometimes they'll have good landscaping contractors that will really do their best, and sometimes they really don't have landscapers, they just have builders and everything runs its course. It really depends.
We were talking about writing a tree preservation. I don't want to say ordinance, but some standards for our ordinances. And so I was just curious if you had heard of any towns that had some really successful, language or success around tree preservation.
In terms of individual trees,
And for development, so we have a lot of, beautiful big trees and old trees here. So, we've had times where clear cutting isn't like a forest management process, but
They clear cut it for lawns.
they clear cut it for, grass management. Just curious if you had heard of any communities in the area or in the state that had.
no, probably not the best one to ask for that.
Okay.
There is a-
Especially because I'm so new to this program that I'm in.
There
now.
is a book, right, that you have of all the tree ordinances in Connecticut, isn't
Oh,
there?
yeah, well, every tree law, yeah.
Yeah.
If you want to look through that.
That sounds fun.
But that,
Extensive.
just so you know, on the tree law book, that was as of 2019.
Okay.
That's still the most up-to-date we have. Of course, there's been some ordinances and statutes passed since then. Not many, not a ton, but there have been, and they're not going to be in that book. That's just the most recent thing we've got. I know that Nick Zito might be a good one to talk to in the agency. Do you know who Nick is?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay, he might be good. He's in charge of the Forest Practices Act.
Mm-hmm.
And he's very good at explaining to towns the laws and interpreting them, how that applies to you and your own governing. He might be really good at, I know how to reach Ben. I can get him contact information for him if you want.
We have it.
Okay. You have it?
I can certainly give it to you.
Oh, okay, okay. But I know that there's
It's
some
Nick
towns
Zito,
even.
Nick Zito who lives in town here, correct?
Yeah, he does. Yes, as a matter of fact.
Uh,
But there are even some towns that are allowed to come up with their own forest practices, ordinances and stuff, independent of the State Forest Practices Act. For whatever reason, you gotta ask Nick this one, but there's 4 towns in the state that are allowed to do it. No other town is. And I think it's because they have something about how they've agreed to not to go against what the State Forest Practices Act states. And Kent is one of them. Kent has its own, don't ask me to name all the others right now, but that's one of the towns.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Does the state is working on their new plan of conservation development, I'm assuming, right, at the same time that the towns are doing it as well? And I was just curious if there's anything you know about how they're transitioning to more of like a conservation perspective or a forestry perspective?
I think they are, but I can't tell you any details on that. Again, I'm kind of new to this program as far as some of those intricacies. I worked strictly in state forests for 27 years. They didn't let me out of the woods very much. So, yeah. It's kind of like hibernating from some of these questions.
Is there somebody in the state that we could talk to about what their perspective is on it? these days?
Well, one good one might be Danica Dorosky. She's the state's urban forester.
Mhm.
She's in charge of the urban forestry program, and I think she would be a really good one to talk to.
Okay.
Sustainable CT should have some information that might be useful as well.
Urban forestry is kind of inclusive of a lot of things these days, and there's a lot of overlap with what they do versus what we do in municipalities and stuff now, and they have a lot of funding. They've been getting funding from the Inflation Reduction Act, and sometimes climate change funds come their way, but they've been hiring people and stuff, and they've been getting it. Danica would be a great one to talk to
Okay.
as a starting point.
Thank you.
So I know I answered some of your questions. I don't know how well I answered a few, but
Very helpful.
Thank you.
I'll do my best.
Thank you.
Great, yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I hope I didn't
Thank you,
take
David.
up way more time or anything. than-
All
Nope.
valuable.
I was
Thank you
supposed to
very
very
much.
No,
You're welcome.
wonderful.
Thank you.
You're all welcome.
And this presentation will be available. We can send.
It can be. Do
Okay.
you want it to be?
Yes, please.
That would be lovely.
I missed it, so I would love to see
PDF.
it.
Oh,
Fine.
okay.
So I have a copy. I can, if you don't mind, I can.
That's fine.
share that with the commission and we can disseminate it. If
That's
okay.
fine. As far as I'm concerned, anything we present like this is public information. So
Oh,
that's
okay.
totally fine.
Thank you.
You got it.
Okay. Okay, let's go back to our agenda here. Mika, do you want to address point number 4, report on the Country Club feasibility grant consultant selection?
Is there anything in particular you're looking for in terms of the
Well,
report?
I think,
Sure. What doesn't necessarily need to be a report, but
Yeah.
at one of our previous meetings, you had made a comment about it. So we thought we would, and we all made comments. So we thought we would invite the opportunity for you to make your comment again, and then we could have a discussion
Understood.
about it.
It's,
So we put it on the agenda.
what I'm thinking, as far as grants are concerned, and as relates to the country club, we did apply for what's called a brownfield grant, a BAR grant. And it's specifically to do planning and assessment related to that piece of property. Particularly in its brownfield because there's abandoned, contaminated areas there that could require remediation and it would otherwise not be able to be used unless we did something with it. So this grant is very specifically for the planning aspect of it. And there's about $110,000 that's earmarked specifically for planning. There's another 17, and then there's the rest of it. The remaining, the total amount of the grant is $132,000 and we did receive that we've been approved for it. However, now we've got to go through the administrative aspects of responding to all the criteria and requirements associated with getting the actual grant itself. And that's what we're in the process of doing right now. So about 110 is for planning. The other portion is divided for it's like a phase 1 remediation, which is just simply an assessment report saying
Testing.
you need it or you don't need it kind of thing. So it's not a heavy expense. It's not fixing anything, and it's not going deeply into it. Like a phase 2 is a little bit more involved and more
Is it
expensive.
for the whole area or just the area that was developed or the area that was also like?
What do you mean, the remediation or the grant, the plant?
The grant to test?
The remediation piece of it
Yeah,
is
the, like,
really,
the
it would be for the
remediation
entire,
assessment.
it's whatever we designate. We've done remediation on that property in the past. So we identified areas where there might still be additional remediation required. So we'll focus on those areas.
And that's for the assessments, like testing?
Correct, just to
Joy
see.
had a question several meetings ago about whether or not there were persistent chemicals and things that
The
were used.
PFAS,
Mm-hmm.
or, because it was a country club, so.
Pesticides and.
What, have we done soil samples? Has the water been tested in the
Yes.
pond, for instance,
I can't speak to the particulars of everything that's been done, but yes, there was some considerable remediation and certainly some testing associated with remediation that has been done previously and cared for, but not everything has been done. There's pieces of the property where the information that came back was, well, you don't need to do anything unless you're going to do something on that in that area. If you're going to disturb it, then we got to do some more testing. We've got to do some more, which is a reason we haven't done very much other than that. But overall, there seems to be less of a concern with overall. And from what I understand, as a matter of fact, there was quite a bit of surprise in regards to how well the soil is at this point in time. Not that anything's been tested recently, but at the time that it was done, and this is quite some time ago, there was at that point in time there was an indication that things were pretty good.
To clarify my question, I guess, it was the grant that we have for the assessment of the property. Is it
All
for-
the same grant.
Yes, but the portion of it that is just carved out for assessment, will that assess like the area that was, like the lawns for the country club, the waterways, and where development has been previously, or is it more specifically targeted to a certain area?
I think we need to, because I'm not familiar enough with the previous report and the previous work that was done, Diana, to say unequivocally. My basic understanding is that we did a more thorough assessment in the past. And I think it's 10 years, something along those lines. So it's not like when I say in the past, I don't mean like 2-3 years ago, but sometime before that. So there's a general sense that there's no need to do what you're describing in every part of the property. Could we? Sure. It's just going to cost money to do it.
They had,
but-
previously they had already done.
Correct.
The analysis.
Correct. And there was a sense, and that's, again, I don't have all the details. Certainly we can, I can pull some records and we can see what we can find. Obviously, we still have
Sure.
that reporting, and we have people like Tony who have been here who can probably, off the top of his head, tell us a little bit more. So,
Yeah.
but that doesn't seem to be a significant concern. There's areas, for example, where
So that's
not
a
where
good
they-
thing, because then, we don't have to worry about, and I'm not saying we don't have to worry about, I'm just saying, if it had been done before and there was no presence of anything, then, like groundwater contamination from such things may not be as great of a concern if those things weren't present. As
Here-
an example, a hypothetical.
The areas of concern are the areas where there's buildings and the areas where they, for example,
Stored
did
chemicals.
load, like loaded pesticides, not necessarily where they dumped them or stored them or where there might be a significant amount of that. As I say, I know we've done some remediation in the past, but at this point, the areas that we're looking at, there seems to be a particular area, and it's more along the lines of a working area where there
It's
could be
higher
spill.
concentration.
It's, well, there's an area where it's not as highly concentrated as where they might have stored it, or where where there was a spill, or where there was an oil
There's an
tank
area
or something
right
like that.
sort of a few acres away from the main building, I think that you're talking about, that is sort of, it has some construction buildings.
I don't know if it's acres away, but yes, there's,
Yeah.
there's where the buildings were, where they,
Storage.
where they put gas in the lawnmowers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And obviously, as you're putting gas in lawnmowers, you might spill, so you want to check those areas. But the remediation piece, it's a small number in terms of the amount of the grant, but it is something that the state requires is done to make sure that, we're in a good spot.
Yeah.
We're
So
in
the
a good spot.
110,000 of the planning
Mhm.
is for the entire
That's for the master planning.
155.
That's a master plan
acres.
for the entire 155 acres,
Right.
correct.
And is that,
And what you're trying to respond to, the criteria of the grant, is that, can you, what are the criterias of the grant?
A lot of it's administrative. There's also
Okay.
some set aside for legal and things of that nature. But for example, they want to be sure that whoever we select is, we've gone through the appropriate process to do that. We went out to a bidding process, things of that nature, and they are qualified individuals who can effectively do a master plan and will give us information that we can use and effectively or productively use going forward to make some decisions.
so have you chosen a consulting firm?
At the last Board of Selectmen meeting, they we voted to use Cooper Robertson as a master planner. And it was between Cooper Robertson and Perry Associates, and we went Cooper Robertson in this case. Really, really, really tough decision. Both were very, very comparable in terms of everything that they offered. The Cooper Robertson architect associated with any architectural type thing that might be done there is the son of the gentleman who architected the country club to begin with, which I'm just, from a personal standpoint, that's just something that stuck out to me because I like the idea of there being some sort of a historical thread, if you will, associated with anybody we work with and that type of thing there. So, but Cooper Robertson is a firm we're looking to move forward with. They'll probably, the next step would be for them to begin to put together a scope that they can present to us, and then we see what we do from there. Then we have to negotiate the contract. We're not negotiating contracts yet or doing anything along those lines, because we have to make sure from a grant perspective that we actually have the money.
And you had mentioned in that previous meeting, the special meeting that we had, that you want us to start thinking about,
Again,
what is exactly that you see us doing on conservation?
my sense and my vision I've tried to always communicate the same thing, is that this is a significant piece of property, and one of the things we haven't really done in the past that I feel we really need to do, and I think the difference in what we're doing now is that we want to take a look at the entire property. We don't want to just say there's 20 acres or 30 acres that a builder would like to develop, and let's flesh that out, but rather to truly understand. And from my perspective, the property is large enough for us to really look at a number of things, consistent with some of the things that David said in terms of making sure there's an area that we can manage to the environmental criteria that we might want to. So to set aside some property for specific purposes or for conservation, maybe is a way to put it. Well, what property would that be? And things that experts like him in who he works for and who he represents, it's important that we get that input to understand that, and it's important that the consultants who we work with get that input. They're going to ask for it because that's what they do. They're looking for as much information from us as they possibly can to understand how best to deliver the information that they're going to put together. So we should be considering that. I mean, To me, that's just a natural progression. What areas should be conserved? What areas should be kept as open space? What areas should we develop, if there's gonna be development there? You know, that's what we should be looking at. So,
Does the town have other properties that have brown sites that they're looking at also?
brownfields,
Yeah.
not town property that we've identified specifically, Diana. I'm trying to take a closer look at that, quite honestly, but there's
Yeah,
not.
I'm thinking of the transfer station, like over there in
Yeah,
Fields.
it's not really, transfer station's not really a brownfield site. We are looking at it for solar, you know, candidly. It's, we're looking very hard at it for solar and, you know, that type of thing, just because it's ideally suited and the government has, government seems to incent towns to try to reuse that property in that way. But we don't, you know, brownfield is really something like the country club where there's a structure or there's industrial or things of that nature. Town-owned property. There may be brownfield,
Well, was it not a landfill there before?
yes, at the transfer station.
Yeah.
Yes, it was landfill.
So
It
that would be
is.
a.
You said
It is a
was what?
landfill.
And
It
it
is a
will
landfill.
remain that.
So that
You
is a.
can't undo it.
What?
But that's why it's
The
perfectly
transfer station is
suited to be
landfill.
Landfill?
a solar farm.
So was-
because
so
you
was
could
this.
just Put that,
So,
Landfill, where Public
Public
Works
Works
is,
is,
was
yeah.
a total landfill.
so,
Nice.
I've dumpster dived there.
You rebel.
No, I've landfill dived.
so that's what I
I
was
want
referring
that, I want a
to.
picture of that, or I don't believe it happened.
Find
says
lots
it
of good
happened, it
things.
happened to you.
Well, thank you, Mika. Is that anything?
I have
Oh, sorry.
No, I have something.
And just
Yeah.
to Joyce's point quickly,
Yeah.
if we wanted to kind of dig into and interrogate someone about what some of those requirements look like, obviously we can't put you on the spot and you're not on the front lines of it, who would be the best person to kind of help us understand those
As
requirements?
for which requirements are you referring
For
to?
the grant purposes, like what the criteria looks like, what is this, like, what.
That is
main
us.
criteria
No, we're on the front. We are doing it. And Tony's, the finance organization, Tony and his finance people are the ones who get involved in it, but I'm involved in it as well. But it's more, as I say, it's more administrative. It's paperwork, making sure that the language, that they want to make sure we're using the money for what their intention of doing this. They want to revitalize brownfield type environments, brownfield type properties.
For
So-
what, though?
For that, and see, and it was very, for example, this is a great example to your point, their language when they sent us a grant was was more heavy on housing than we felt it should be. So we negotiated with them to change the language so it's more open, because this is a planning grant. So we could use this money, work with this consultant, and end up not doing anything.
Anything, right.
Possibly, that's an option. Or we could, you know, or any number of different things. Maybe one of them is not housing. And I wanted to make certain that this, you know, very clear with them up front that that's the way we want to approach this. Because we want to be as objective as possible. We've made sure that the people we're working with are going to be as objective as possible. So we had to change the language in their documents to reflect that. So that's one of the things you have to do, go back, and when I say administrative, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about, to make sure that what we're saying we're going to do, we actually plan to do, and what they expect us to do, we can actually deliver, you know, that type of thing there.
When they approve that, they
They did
approve
approve
the
it,
change.
they did approve it, yes.
So
Okay.
they'll
Because-
give us the 132,000 even if we do not end up moving forward and
It's-
making housing on that site?
Yes, it's a planning grant, it's for us to assess.
Okay.
And
Great.
determine what the best use for that property is going to be. They would like us to use that property productively. But that could be a lot of different things. So now, make no mistake, the state as a whole, if you listen and you're reading,
Yeah.
housing is an important element of something that the state needs, it's something that the town needs, et cetera. So it's not to say that that's not going to be considered at all. It's
Oh,
certainly going to be
totally.
considered as an option just as much as
Right, and I
everything
know that
else.
the state has that as an initiative, and it also has, you know, climate change initiatives and
Exactly.
keeping land, you know, conserved. So, you know,
And-
I think
and
if
we
we
are-
could do both, that would be, you know,
And we are working with 155 acres, so in my unscientific or in my opinion, there's an opportunity for us to do both.
Excuse me, Mika, so the 132,000 is for administrative
It's for
and
planning.
planning, but none of it's going towards remediation at this point.
No,
None of
there's
it's
about,
going-
I think it's, I don't remember the exact number, I think it's 17,000 is going toward remediation.
Oh,
You know,
okay.
and when we say remediation, it's what they call phase one, and it's really just a,
Investigation.
it's an investigation, but it's
Okay.
mostly an investigation on paper. It's, okay,
Okay.
what was it used for? What, you know, they look up records,
They're not doing soil samples.
They're not doing soil
Okay.
samples, they're not going out there and testing water, they're not doing that type of thing necessarily, so it's, that's why it's a lower cost type of a, all they're doing is saying, is there a reason that we should really be concerned about this? Is there records that show that it used to be a country club and this particular area had this particular chemical that they were storing, and there was a newspaper article that said that they spilled a massive amount of it, you know, that type of thing.
Anytime you have like mechanics and you're working on, you know, vehicles or
Equipment,
equipment,
yeah.
exactly, you know, that's all has to be evaluated first.
And one more question, I'm sorry, you
Please.
probably already answered this, but I just want to clarify. So at this point, none of the money is going to the architect?
Oh,
It's
no.
all, so, okay, that's
So
a
the-
separate thing.
The firm
Okay.
that and one of the reasons I'm excited about working with these people is that the firm that we're working with is truly a master planner. So that means that they do design, they do architecture, they do, like, for example, they have what he mentioned, I think it was David who mentioned, like, landscape
Right.
landscape engineers. They have landscape engineers and landscape architects. This is what they do.
Okay.
If you say, you know, like they have people who would understand and would talk to somebody like David to recognize what the values were and things of that nature, and deliver that information to us in a way that's, you know, more of an analysis type thing where there's, you know, a value associated with what they're saying. So that's one of the reasons we want to work with a firm like this, and we're looking to spend the kind of money we're looking to spend, is because it will give us a full assessment on a broader sense, and from a broad standpoint in terms of what can be done, shouldn't be done, etc.
I have a backup question on that. So when you mentioned this during the comment section of the previous meeting, somebody else commented that we had provided questions, you know, about the perspective of conservation and community engagement. And so we had also requested the answers from the two consultants who were still in the running at that time. Could we please see the responses from the consultant that was selected, so we have a better sense of how they were responding to our questions?
The questions were asked in the format of a meeting. You know, it was verbal. It wasn't necessarily, here's a bunch of questions, respond on these format. We can do that at this point in time, and we can ask them if they would be kind enough to outline exactly how they responded.
That would be, yeah, I mean, I think that would be great.
Well, just so that we can understand, you know, what their responses were to those specific concerns, you know, from, you know, what projects they had done, you know, where they, how they address those conservation issues when they're looking at a sizable piece of property for any given project. And we had a really good list of questions that we had come
We
up
did.
with.
I thought we
so,
worked hard on
yeah,
that.
we did.
And I think it's important if, you know, you're asking the Conservation Commission to weigh in on various, you know, topics about the country club. You had asked us to weigh in, and so we provided our questions, and I think, you know, good practice, good sportsmanship, getting the responses back to the questions that we thought were important to hear the replies would be great.
Not a problem.
I piggyback on what Diane's, I think it'd be helpful to have a flow chart so that we know exactly what's going to happen in sequence.
Like a timeline,
A
right?
timeline,
timeline,
a flow chart, a process chart.
Probably don't
so
have that
we-
yet.
We definitely don't have that.
But do you have a timeline
So that
about
you-
when you're gonna
it's-
get the scope of work? And
Well,
Yeah,
but I
the-
think
the-
I
all
think the
it-
answers to our questions also should be reflected in the scope of work, because we had
Right.
a lot of questions about our engagement and community engagement and their approach, and I think we were, you know,
Right.
talking about what we felt was important from you know, the community's perspective and from a conservation perspective, so that we knew, you know, how we could be involved and how we could stay up to date as to what was going on.
If we had had the timeline with the dates and the process, agreement, dates, time, decision, that's what a whole process chart is, so that we would have known at each step what was happening.
Right.
I think we were at one step and then things moved on and we weren't really aware of it. So if we had a whole process, like for example, even the architect, I'm glad that they are land architects. What is the decision? How much are we going to pay them? What is their timeline to start? When are they, just like some kind of flow chart so that we can see it happening and then we won't be catching up at the end.
So we'll know how to interface more effectively, because we'll do
Yes.
it in a more
So
timely fashion.
yeah, so we're going to be
So
part
that
of
we
the
can
process.
interface,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
The information in regards to who these people are and what they do is on the website. Look at it. Just refer to it, because it's complete, it's comprehensive. It'll give you a real good sense of what they're capable of doing. It also gives a general outline in terms of a timeline. You know, like
This
in this
was their
particular
proposal?
instance, this was their proposal
Which
and
we've
their
read.
updated proposal.
Yeah.
Right.
So there's about 8 months that they said they were going to do. We haven't gotten any further than that. So you're not missing anything. There's
Okay.
nothing in what you should do is plug into what we're doing from a Board of Selectmen standpoint, because that's where this will
Okay.
be. That's where it'll be communicated. That's where it'll
Well,
be.
I think that's what we tried to do with providing our questions to the Board of Selectmen, so that we could get those responses from the consultants back, so we understand exactly how we get to engage.
The Board of Selectmen looks at it as your input, as this is input from our conservation that they're interested in finding out. So we presented it and we use it as a means by which to make sure your input is valuable to us because you represent conservation. So
And
we
so I would
present those
imagine that,
questions
like,
as, from that perspective.
We provide the questions, they provide the answers, we can evaluate their answers, and then provide the Board of Selectmen with how we interpret what they stated, based on, you know, our expertise and background and
Yeah,
conservation.
because we weren't at those meetings or those interviews, so we don't know how their answers compared to, let's say, the other, you know, company that was in the running. So, you know, not that it matters now, you have chosen who you've chosen, but it would still be helpful if we knew which of the 10 questions were asked, which of the 10, you know,
Well,
how
I
did they
think that
answer those
that's
questions?
a lot to ask, but I think the part that seems really important is that we don't, which I think we have in other situations, like with TP&Z, gotten behind the 8 ball, not knowing something is being queued up,
Coming up
and then
with-
don't
yes,
have
exactly.
time to anticipate, because we can't meet except for once a month, and we can't be a quorum, so then it gives us access to being able to figure out how to be most helpful and represent.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So, can I skip ahead, Mika? I really appreciate all the time you put into this, but I also have an agenda item in old business, which is the grant that we received, the Connecticut DEEP Trails Grant. And it is going through some of the similar administrative stuff, and I know Karen Crosby was involved in that. And she was out this week, and I wanted to talk to her about it, and we're not meeting again until September, so I think we should.
Can I ask
Yeah.
one question on the previous topic before we move on?
Sure.
Just before, so I'm just curious if at some point in the process, if we're going to be able to interface directly with Cooper Robinson, now that you guys have picked someone, because it'd be great to, you know, whoever it is that is able to talk to DEP, it would be great to, you know, talk to them directly and make those connections and that sort of thing.
There's no doubt in my mind that the conservation they would solicit your input or attend a meeting or going forward. I mean, they're going to do it with the public. They would obviously do it with our commissions beyond just conservation as well. So in answer to the question, yes, I'm sure there will be. I'm completely certain there will be that opportunity.
Great. Do we have a liaison from conservation to Board of Selectmen? I know we do do we have a designated person here?
Well,
No.
hang on, there was a Board of Selectmen meeting that was 7 hours long, so.
Are you signing up?
No, I think we
That sounds like a perfect job for.
Keep in mind, the boards and commissions the commissions in particular, are set up specifically to input to the Board of Selectmen. So one of the things that we will be doing is, rather than a liaison, In the past, we've used the liaisons. And this is me, this is from my, my experience. My sense is what we're going to do going forward is ask the commissions to come to the board meetings and present what they're doing, and also for us to input to them what we'd like to see them doing, or, what our charge is. We've just put together a strategic plan that we've completed that'll, continue to, it's a dynamic document, it'll be
That was the
updated.
7-hour meeting.
That was, it probably was, it probably was. I think it
Might
was
be.
5 hours, but so you will receive notification that we'd like to meet with conservation twice a year, for example. And prior to that meeting, we'd like you to provide us a report, selectmen a report, and then have your chair come in, and your group come in and have a dialogue with the selectmen, so you can ask questions similar to what you're asking me, and we can also ask you or provide some direction in terms of some of the things that are important, and you can understand what it is that the selectmen, the board, the entire board is trying to do, so as to make sure that our commissions are engaged in going in the right direction, or going in the same direction, or at least understand. All of the commissions are set up because they have specific areas of expertise. So I'm not saying everything's going to be like, we want you to do exactly this because this is what we want to do, but rather this is generally speaking, here's what we want to do with sustainability. How can you help us? How can you help us get to this? And if this is a goal, how can you help us? Is it a bad goal? If it's a bad goal, let us know so that we can modify it. But we feel it's important. I feel it's important that we understand what it is we want to do and how we can get to those. And there needs to be a better interaction between the commissions to make sure that everyone feels that they're getting the input they need, and their work that they're doing is valued and essential to what the town needs.
And if you had a designated time
You
for
would.
a particular topic, we don't have to go for the whole 7 hours, just what pertains to.
You're backpedaling now on that one.
You never know.
But then you would miss
Just
such
here,
a great
I'll
meeting.
tell you right now, your agenda says that David was going to be done at 8:25. So it
Ours?
doesn't always go the way.
Right.
it
That was
doesn't
a
go the way-
typo.
We should be saying goodbye about right now. Just saying, right?
Okay,
That
well,
clock's
let's speed this up a little bit then.
So in regards to your question, you were starting to ask about the
I'm sorry,
trail
I just
grant.
have one more question. I'm sorry.
Sure, please.
Since we're on this and we're talking about interaction and interface and working with the group, is there an opportunity for one of our representatives to join the conversation about the scope of work?
No.
Okay, there you have it.
No, from a practical standpoint, we don't understand exactly what it's going to be. Most of that work is done by staff during the business day. So if you're saying you would like to, I'm happy to consider that.
Sure.
I'm happy to consider that and reach out, but to say that, no, yeah,
I'm
absolutely,
not
you're going to do it.
saying, dictate the agenda, but definitely like weigh in and just give some
That-
perspective.
I try to be as open as possible and communicate as much as possible in terms of what we're doing. If you want input, just ask. That's, yeah. Don't get me wrong, when I say
think Ben
no,
would love to do
I'm
that.
not gonna say, oh yeah, by all means, we're gonna do this, and, it's like, if you're interested in having input, let me know. We'll let you know when things are happening, and if somebody can make it and it's an appropriate thing to do, happy to consider it.
That would be great, thank
So,
you. We formally make that request.
Will you write that down?
Thank you.
Great, because I think that's an important point. So, can I go back to my little thing? We need to learn what we need to do to fulfill the grant, and we don't have a meeting till September. And so I'm realizing even a little more how much bureaucracy is involved in any grant. And,
They don't just give you free money.
and us making sure we comply with
So
it.
am I,
And
Sharon.
we need some instruction because we need to get going on it. So I'm trying to, we'll pursue.
We need to work with Tony Genovese
Yeah.
on that, so.
Sharon, Karen is back on Monday.
Yeah.
Tony leaves on Monday. So we could, I could bring it up with Tony tomorrow to see if he knows if there's anything.
Yeah,
But what
I
is it
called the
you're-
office, he didn't seem to know, he referred me to Karen, and that's all good, it's just that we don't have a meeting for 2 months, so we need to figure out a way.
Do we know when we need to respond to the state by?
Yeah, well, we need to know some logistics about what we need to do. So
Mhm.
we'll talk to Karen, and then I'll let people know.
Sounds
Okay.
good. Yeah, Karen's definitely running with this, so she would be the one.
Okay, great, thank you.
You're welcome.
There's actually another topic that we need to talk about while we have Mika here. And can I see your agenda real quick? It has to do with, it's actually the topic right above that, the Westward Scenic Road
right.
designation and the letter for residents. You know, if there's we just want to make sure, I know we've drafted a letter, communication that, you know, you guys worked hard on, and just curious if Mika can let us know, like, what are the next steps for that letter? How do we bring it before the Board of Selectmen or a town attorney, or what we need to do to make sure that the communication
If I can
has-
fill in a little bit here.
Okay.
This message came because, as you all know, the letter was written, we edited it, I think everybody decided it was good. I found out the names of the people, the residents that it would go to. And then I came looking for letterhead, because I said the commission doesn't have any letterhead. What do we use for letterhead? We can't just write a letter on nothing. And Allison had she said, oh, I have letterhead. And she also said, I think you should pass it by the town attorney, which I thought was a very good point.
Okay.
And so I sent it to her. And then meanwhile, I think she spoke to Mika, and she wrote back to me and said, we have to go through to the Board of Selectmen with this letter to get it approved. And for me, it's so convoluted, because we're going to the Board of Selectmen to get approval for this letter, and then we have to have other letters.
It's Barbara, any communication that would come out from the town has to be reviewed by the attorneys to make sure that we're doing
Oh,
what's
that's,
appropriate.
yeah, and that's, that, exactly.
Additionally, if it's coming from the town, the representatives for the town are the Board of Selectmen. So the commission shouldn't be sending out a letter. TPZ is their own entity. There's a lot they can do in regards to
And what-
notifications of people and things that tax collector sends out, tax information to the town. But even, you know, that's stuff that we all know, but commission shouldn't be sending out a letter on town letterhead without the Board of Selectmen having any knowledge of it. Additionally, if you're sending out letters on letterhead to certain citizens, if there are those who might be opposed to what you're saying you're doing or what you're requesting assistance for, they're not getting a letter, and there's some concern, particularly from a legal standpoint or from a FOIA standpoint, et cetera, just in regards to that. So it's not so much that we're not trying to add bureaucracy to it, but there has to be some control over making sure communication that's going out to the public where town entities are concerned. You're a town entity. You're commissioners for the town. If you're going to put something out there, we have to make sure that it's in the best interest of the town, and it's correct in everything that we're doing. The Board of Selectmen are the ones who make those types of decisions in terms of representing the town. So
Okay.
it really should be something, and don't get me wrong, it's not, I think
No,
this
no,
is a
no.
wonderful thing.
I don't think that's
really
the
do.
problem. That
No,
was-
my concern was, it isn't really a concern, I was, I guess, just amazed, as a matter of fact, was that this was not a letter requesting anything. This was simply a letter to inform the people that live on this particular road that the commission is going to go through this process of trying to make the road into a scenic drive, and we hoped that they would support our ideas.
But
That
you're
was
doing that before you've let the Board of Selectmen know that that's something you want to do.
Okay, because
So-
eventually we have to go back to the Board of Selectmen saying, we've done this, now approve it.
Well, first, it's like, okay, this is what's happening, the commission is doing this, is there anything we should be considerate of, or is there a process that should be followed? This all started because we looked it up to see what's the process for designating a road as a scenic road.
Yeah, which I
Okay,
have
what's
here.
the process? That's the process. That's the process for anyone. You're taking it on as the commission, that's great, but no, you haven't gone to the board to indicate that. Now, I'm
So
happy to
once
take
the
it to
letter
the
has
board.
been reviewed by legal, then the next step would be for Barbara and the commission to present it to the Board of
To the
Selectmen.
Board of Selectmen saying
this is or send it to the Board of Selectmen to say this is the communication, what's the next step
think
for us?
someone from the commission should come to the board, come to the Board of Selectmen meeting
Who we need
to
to get on the
represent.
agenda.
Correct,
And we
Okay.
need, yes, and
We have a next
that would
step.
be,
correct.
but, and I guess my question is, in order to make things more streamlined, should we not only present that letter, but also present some of the material we're going to have to send out to
By all
various
means.
people at the same time, according to the
When you come in front of
The
the board, you
process.
should have all of that.
We
And
should
you
have-
So that you
that
can
was-
outline the entire
That's-
process, what you're doing, how you're
that was
planning
my
to do it,
question.
and what you need, what you might need from the town, including maybe a letter that says, that notifies those people of what you're trying to do on their street. I don't think it's unreasonable, and I,
No,
No,
it's
it's
not
not,
favor of
I don't
what
think
you're
it's
doing,
unreasonable
but-
either. It was simply strange in the sense of just this letter. I see it as a whole package going before, so that we can get moving on it. But if we just go before the Board of Selectmen with this letter and then
I agree. Then.
2
you gotta
months
go back-
later come back with
No, I
a
totally agree.
next step, and 2 months later back with the
Understood,
next step.
understood.
So
And that's
I-
not what I'm suggesting,
That's,
so.
yeah, okay, perfect. Then that's what we'll do.
Okay.
Excellent.
Come on, there's gotta be more, come on.
9:27.
That's why we put them on the agenda.
Okay, so should we move on? Does anyone have any questions or anything that Mika needs to respond to? Because I'm sure he's ready to.
No, I'll stick around. Thank you.
Really? Wow. I think something that we need to do that I think fell through the cracks is write some thank you notes now that we have received this grant to the people who helped us. So does anyone volunteer to write a thank you note or two?
I can write it. Do we have a list of the folks anywhere? Do we know?
I think we can remember who, it was the Historic Society, it was the.
Oh.
Andy
Danzig,
Danzig.
it was
Oh, yeah.
the Land Trust, it was the, what's the other conservancy that does Pond Lily and what's that
Oh,
group?
West
West.
River.
Yeah, I think those are the four that I think.
Happy to do it.
Okay,
What about, could
what?
our little assistant Dolores, can she get a letter?
Sure, she can get a letter.
She
If
would
we can
love
get her
one.
address, she can get a letter.
Okay, good.
Great. Okay, Rachel, perfect. And, updates on Coopop, June 24th, 2024 meeting. I think that would be me or Barbara.
I think I just saw that they canceled that July 22nd meeting
Yes.
on the website.
Yeah, there's no, the next meeting is an August 26th
Okay.
meeting, and if anyone would like to volunteer to go to that, that would be great. I think they agreed to go to the Board of Selectmen with the, having agreed that they would endorse selling the Enoch property by moving the trail. And I don't know when that's going before the Board of Selectmen or what that time frame is, but
I'm sorry, I missed that.
no, it's the Enoch property. They
Mhm.
couldn't, they
Yes.
passed that they were willing to have it be sold.
Mhm.
The Board of Selectmen did or Coopop?
No,
or something?
Coopop.
Coopop.
Board of Select, that's why I said I.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just-
So they'll submit the letter to the, well, the next step is the Board of Selectmen, I guess. And does anyone want to go to the August 26th Coopop meeting? You guys can think about it, maybe by the end of the meeting we can figure that out.
What day is it?
That's what I'd rather.
It's
August 22nd,
Monday.
or
It's
26th?
a Monday?
At
26th.
6.
It's the first day of
First day of
school.
school, yeah.
I'm happy to go to it again.
Okay, Barbara, that's
Should
great.
someone send Coopop a calendar?
Of our
Labor
meetings.
Day.
Sorry, Nicole. School important days.
So on the Enoch property, I thought the last, where it was left was that there was some questions about, there were some deed restrictions and they didn't know if those would be enforceable and there,
Well,
I don't
people
know if there
presented
was an
saying
update
that
on
that
that.
would be difficult, and Nicole, the chairperson, thought that that wasn't really new information, and that they didn't need to re-vote on it.
I guess I could watch the meeting replay, but was there any talk about cost considerations for moving a trail? As part
No.
of who
No.
would take
No.
that on and who would be responsible?
Nope.
Good question.
And when does that go to
No, and there was
Board of
quite
Selectmen?
some pushback, right, from.
There was a lot of
Yeah,
pushback.
actually-
A lot of
Okay.
pushback from
Actually-
residents.
Yeah, and also I think it wasn't a unanimous decision at all.
Oh.
Well, it wasn't unanimous originally, and people still had reservations, even though it was decided by the chairperson that there wasn't enough new information to take another vote.
See, when they,
It wasn't simply the chairperson. The chairperson checked with legal to see under what circumstances
Okay.
it would be required, and it was supported by what she found out from legal in terms of the decision that was made. And,
Good you're here, Mika.
I'm sorry?
Good you're here, Mika.
So it's, and, you know, they voted to send to the Board of Selectmen their recommendation, if you will, that the property is saleable. It's a property that is saleable. There's no restrictions, there's nothing that would inhibit it in the sense of documentation and deed information.
This is
and
the
things
one
like
that says they're not allowed to remove any trees?
correct.
Correct. And the reason for that
There wasn't
was-
anything about like the enjoyment of the town.
Wasn't anything
There wasn't
about-
anything about the enjoyment of the town residents of that property. That's the other one, the farm one.
Yes.
The one,
Well,
Not indeed.
okay.
I think part of the discrepancy is that at the former meeting, when they did vote to reopen discussion on it, the people that asked for that reopening of the discussion thought that there would be another vote, and legal said there didn't need to be another vote because there was no new information brought up. They had another discussion but in the former meeting, it wasn't stated that it wasn't voted upon that they would not only discuss it, but re-vote on it.
Oh, got
So
it.
that,
But the previous time that they tried to sell that property, there was a request, right, that whoever would be purchasing it would have to uphold, those, like, deed restrictions and.
the deed restrictions
and the-
are there.
And the right, and
they're
the,
in perpetuity.
in
As
perpetuity,
far,
right.
as far as the trees are concerned, but the
And the access.
trail is relatively new as far as, obviously, the sale of the property, so.
Trail in what sense, Barbara?
In what sense, what
New-
I'm saying
new
is
in what
not,
sense?
it's not deed restricted, is what
Oh.
I'm saying, in any way.
Hmm.
Whereas the trees are deed restricted.
Right.
That's what I'm saying.
It appears, basically from the information that I read, it appears that the property will not be developed, cannot be developed, because the trees can't be cut down.
Yeah, it's pretty,
Not to mention the fact that it's
It's-
severely sloped.
Right.
And,
yes,
you know, it's
and not removing trees makes it a little difficult.
to do anything on it. So in my understanding, it's not like we're just going to put it on the open market. There is an interest expressed by the property owner who owns property near it, specifically interested in doing it and willing to agree to an easement to make sure that whatever we want, if we don't want anything done, he's willing, they're willing, from what I understand. I haven't talked to the property owner directly.
Is it also like available for, like we were talking about the land trust before, right, and what the other resources are? Is it also, like, is the property also available for like other parties to pursue purchasing it as well? Like not just the resident who lives next to it, but like, let's say the land trust wanted to. Would we entertain that as well?
It's available to anybody if it's put on the market, right?
So it's not like it's just the only thing we're doing is
Coop up
earmarking
in
this
the-
property just for this one person.
Correct. Correct.
We can't do that.
There's,
That's a good point, you can't.
Coopop basically just did an assessment on the property, just to say, there's not wetlands, there's not this, there's not that. there doesn't seem to be any reason not to consider selling that property to the benefit of the town.
Okay, but so then,
On the
I
open
guess-
market.
sorry?
I'm sorry, on the open market.
Yes,
Correct.
So it could go on the open, so it could be available for anybody?
yeah. I mean, I don't think the town could restrict who they're.
No, but
Offering it
I
to-
guess I'm just curious if, you know, the land has been preserved for so long. I mean, it's deed restricted, not to remove any trees. Why is there like just a sole focus on the one neighbor or one of the neighbors who, you know, abuts the property?
Probably because they
Initiated the whole thing.
expressed an interest in it.
Oh, they are the ones who express the initial, that's how that,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
Got it, thank you for
Yes.
clarifying that.
And a price tag hasn't been put on that
No.
yet?
Haven't looked at it at all. Haven't talked to the perspective, the.
And the strange
abutting
thing is
property.
that
As
they
yet.
would not.
That's my next step.
They make an
Except-
offer, is that it, and then,
I haven't looked at the process in any way, shape, or form, you know, honestly, in terms of, right now, it's just a matter of, it was an assessment, it's a piece of property that was felt that it's available. I expressed to Coopop and others, during the budget process, that capital budget is of great concern. So if there's properties that are just sitting there doing nothing, that make no sense at all for us to just leave there doing nothing, I'd like to know about it. Because that can certainly help the town as far as our taxes are concerned and our expenses are concerned. So
But it
if
doesn't
that's
really
open
help our
space, there's no
taxes.
taxes there.
if someone
right?
buys it, there is.
It doesn't help our
Jinx.
taxes, though.
It does, Joy, because it's specifically if,
But I didn't
if,
think
for
we could
example,
take
the
the
property
money
is
from a
worth.
purchase of land to
Just let
go
him
towards the
explain.
capital
Wait,
budget, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, we can, because there's no restriction that it has to stay as we would probably want to, I would at least want to look at, and it would be up to the Board of Selectmen as to what we do, but we would want to look at the possibility if we did get income for a sale of property, that we do something to kind of put some money aside for buying open space that might be more appropriate to maintain as open space. But it's not, it's not restricted from that perspective. So,
So say you got, I'm just trying to understand this. So you get $200,000 for this property that they can't build on. They just want a buffer zone so that people aren't walking through their backyard, whatever. $200,000 is not gonna lower our taxes, but it
It'll-
could pay for a line item on 1 year's budget.
it would be, it could go into the capital budget to pay for vehicles or
Right.
something that we have to pay for anyway.
But the land is gone forever.
The land is retained the way it is forever.
Well,
It's not gone. It's
the
not,
trail has to be moved, right?
possibly.
And-
Again, I haven't talked to the owner to see exactly what needs to be done or doesn't need to be done.
Okay.
But one of the reasons that it was even, that we're considering it is because the land would stay what it is. We would reduce our expenses, because there are expenses with us maintaining that property on an annual basis. Not very much, but there are some expenses on that. And if the land is going to stay the way the land is, and they're willing to commit to keep the land the way that it is,
But they're
Well,
not, they're
Which
willing
is a
to
change
move.
from the last time when they
Diane,
wouldn't.
I don't know the details as far as that's
But
concerned. I'd be the
they're
first
talking
to.
about moving the trail, so I guess the question would be really like, you know, if
What's
they're not
involved
planning
with
on
that?
doing anything, then why move the trail? I mean, it's part of the greenway, it's, you know.
So I guess
And
the
there's gonna be
question-
more of a cost for that than, I'd be curious to know also, like, what is that maintenance fee?
But that's theirs, that's not.
Well,
The maintenance fee for it now, for us?
so there's a couple of things, right? Like and as this was brought up in the meeting, it's really hard to enforce these kinds of things, the easements.
No harder than it is to enforce the easements that we have right now, Joy.
Yeah.
It's hard to enforce any easement that we
It
have, but
really
we can.
is.
We do
Right.
enforce easements by letting people know that they're in violation, and we go to legal if we have to do, if there's something that happens there. So we do it's a normal process. That's,
Right.
you know, I mean, that's, understand something. It's an evaluation. We have to assess what it is. That's what we do. But we have to start with understanding, is this a piece of property that we're selling because we want to build a high-rise on, or is this a piece of property that's gonna stay what it is? And is there an opportunity for us to keep a piece of property, leave it the way it is, and in the meantime, pay for vehicles or pay for something out of the capital budget? And is there some value in doing that? And what we're saying is that worth evaluating? In my sense,
I
it
think
is.
you need to evaluate it,
That's-
absolutely. I guess how transparent is that evaluation though? You know, like how do we, you know, obviously as a commission, we're concerned about, you know, because there was a lot of
It
time,
must-
years of time and energy that predates all of us here, that people worked on this already, you know, and figured this out years ago. So for it to come to this new time, right, in this new scenario, I guess, you know, how do we stay part of that conversation or process, or are we
Everything-
just not in it at all?
The process dictates that anything that we do has to go through the Board of Selectmen. There is a public forum for us to express whatever opinions are required and get whatever input we can get so that the Board of Selectmen can make a decision on which way to go. So the process is there. And, you know, so that's the way we do it. In the meantime, what we do is we find out details like, okay, so what does it mean to move a trail? Is that even a thing? Is that even something that they're requiring? What are the, you know, is this person even interested? You know, there's much more that needs to be done before then.
And I wanted to, last week, Barbara had a question about some of the properties and looking at the history of them. Were they part of an open space, part of the development of the required open space? And so I was supposed to call and inquire. So I contacted, I think her name was Christine Sullivan, and the only way that we can determine is to take each piece of property and because we are not on Vision Appraisal, which is where a lot of the realtors get the information. Excuse me. Someone would have to go to the land records and pull out the deeds or the developments and go property by property and find out, was that designated as open space? That's the only way that we can do that. So I just wanted to,
Nicole's already, that's what they did.
No,
They
well-
went through that process already, didn't they?
My question, if somebody a private person has a piece of property that they want to subdivide, they, by law, have to set aside at least 10% and give it to an entity, be it the town or the trust or some nonprofit that will hold it. Is any of the property on the list of town-owned property, any of that 10%
Right.
that people have given as open space that the town or the law requires? And apparently, according to Christine, one would have to check each and every deed. Now, there's not a lot of subdivisions, so there's not a lot of things.
But you were particularly questioning one that's on Northrop that you noticed was a.
No, it was the one it's the one on Ford Road, right next to Aldo Drive. It's impenetrable.
Maybe we could ask Chris to look specifically, or she could help us specifically look at that one and just start with that one. and
That's what
see.
made me think of it, as a matter
Yeah,
of
so
fact.
that would
It's
be a good
just-
place to start, and just check that out and see what the deed says and get ourselves a little more
We
informed.
can ask, yep.
Maybe we should do that for the September meeting.
I can ask them.
That'd be great. I think we should keep moving on here.
No, I think we should beat the first selectmen's, or the Board of Selectmen's record here.
Absolutely not.
I'm just saying.
Tonight's not.
The challenge
Well, actually, there's
accepted.
one more thing that we could be helpful with.
Shortest agenda, longest
Well,
meeting.
I'm glad you used the
He's
word help.
never coming back.
I know. He's like, next time I'm out of town, you guys are meeting.
I'm not available.
I am out of town.
I'll send a
next week,
liaison.
Which is an agenda item, actually. You had mentioned that you'd like the Conservation Commission participants to have a separate email address.
Yes. No, it's not.
I guess that's the end of
Here's
the
what
discussion.
I'm suggesting, it's a suggestion. Here's what I'll tell you. If there's a FOIA request for information, okay, and our lawyers will tell us, they said, okay, we have to, and there's a request for discovery is what they call it. I'm learning these things. If you use your personal email for town business, they can say, we want to know all of anything, any
turn
email
over
that
the
you
emails.
had, you exchanged that has the word tree in it, okay? And for town business, if you're using, just as an example,
Broccoli from here on out.
you would have to look at your personal emails and identify which those, and then download them and store them and send them to them for discovery purposes. So if you're using your personal email and you garden a lot, there's a lot of emails that you might have tree in it that have nothing to do with the town at all. It just makes it more challenging from your perspective. So the recommendation is, if you have, Gmail, you can make any Gmail account you want. So if you have Sharon conservation.conservation@gmail.com, and that's what you used for your business or for town business, if somebody had you check for town emails, it's really easy. So that's kind of the whole thought behind that.
So it's not that the town wants to set up email accounts for us?
No, because there's so many, the town pays for email accounts, so the town's not doing individual email accounts. So, for example, this is a recommendation I made to the Board of Selectmen when we first started. We made Board of Selectmen when we first started. Have a separate email that's specifically for your town business.
So
Because it just
maybe
makes
we
it
should-
easier for us to,
The Board of Selectmen don't have
no,
town
they don't.
emails?
The only one who has a town email is me on the Board of Selectmen.
So maybe we'll bring this up at our next meeting, but people can all think about it and we'll.
I'm not saying it's required, I'm just saying if it's something.
So did the rest of the selectmen, do that then?
Yes.
So,
Well, just all except one of them did not, and that's
Okay.
fine, that's
Okay.
up to him.
okay.
So it's, again,
Another suggestion that might make it easier for folks is if you create a folder in your email account that says like the Bridge Conservation Commission, and all of your correspondence goes in there.
That's
and-
fine, but if you talk about trees
Trees
and,
to somebody
and
else.
to the garden
Which
club,
is-
you're still gonna have to send it to the
I talk about
discovery.
trees a lot.
Yeah,
I'm just
Yeah, we
using
all
that
do,
as an
right?
example, it's just like, but it shows a point. You can
No,
have
it
a
has to be,
broad
no, it
thing.
can't just be the word trees, it has to be a very,
No,
like,
it
it has to be
can't-
something like Woodbridge Tree Ordinance or something.
No, it could be trees.
Somebody
So-
can't
I don't think it
FOIA
ever
you-
would.
Somebody can't FOIA, like, all the town employees to be like, I need all
No,
the topics
no.
they've ever
It would
mentioned
be, it would be
trees.
very specific to whatever it's related to, and let's
Right,
say it
but
had
like
something
it
to
has-
do with the tree.
Right, so if it
you
was
know
like
what
the
I mean.
tree ordinance, it would have to be.
Truffle of trees.
Okay,
For
let's,
example.
It's just an example.
I was like the word the. I want all the emails that say the. No, that doesn't work. It's
But
got to
it's-
be very specific. The request has to be very specific about a very specific topic.
Sorry,
Having been
guys.
FOIA
Keeping in mind, that's,
before.
well, that's FOIA, but there's also legal. If it's a part of if it's part of a court case, it could also be that,
but we don't want that.
so.
Okay, so
But somebody
can we,
wouldn't, sorry, if it was part of a court case, somebody wouldn't have to turn over all their emails that say trees for court evidence.
For discovery.
yes.
well, let's,
It's just, it's a thought for practice.
yes. And the only thought I have is if we do it, let's all have the same convention if we do it. And we can talk about what that, if we want to do it, and if there's a convention in September.
Put it on the September agenda.
That sounds like a great September topic.
Don't send any emails until then.
Exactly,
Okay.
Rachel.
And,
No emails in August.
the last thing we
Email
have
free
is
August.
member comments, and I have one, which is I will be out of the country at our next meeting, and
In
that's fine
September.
with me, but if other we would want to change the meeting, that's also fine with me. So,
For September?
for September.
Okay.
Well, also at September, should we should have a draft of our next meeting dates for 2025.
Okay.
so that we can look at them,
Yeah, we'll have the school calendar.
check
If we
against every
change it,
calendar
just
that
don't
could
make it
possibly
the
be out
fourth
there.
Thursday, please,
Huh?
like we did last time. If we change the date in September, please don't make it the fourth Thursday. Because I have another board meeting on the fourth Thursday, and it made it difficult
I
when
think
I
Sharon
arrived
can
at
attend
9:30
virtually.
to that meeting.
Yeah. So, okay. So do you, everyone want to leave the meeting where it is?
I'm fine. What
I
days?
think it's,
22nd?
I don't mind changing it to accommodate you, Sharon.
It's up to you guys. I mean, whatever you want to do. I think it's.
Well, we have to check and see what the availability is for the other Thursdays that month.
Okay. Does anyone else have any other comments?
Yes.
Okay.
I want you to know that your input is very, it means a lot. So, from this commission, so, you know, I'm still feeling a little, I don't like saying no to anything. So when I responded no before Diana, it was, I want you to make sure to understand it was in regard to the way it was set up. In other words, when Val asked, can we set it up in a particular way? And that's like, I don't see logistically, I don't see that being possible. However,
I appreciate the reflection on it. However, it was in response to my question of can we be involved in the conversation with the scope of work?
no,
and the
you-
answer-
very specifically,
And it was,
can we meet with the consultant when you meet with the consultant?
yeah, can we be a part of the discussion?
Can you
About
meet with
the-
the consultant? And it was like, I can't say, yeah, definitely, because I don't know that that's the case. That I don't know logistically if we can make that happen, because I don't know exactly when we will meet, if you will be available, if, you know, and if you want to be available, what other commissions might want to also be available, and does that also make it, does that all of a sudden make it cumbersome and less productive? And it's that's certainly not the way the process has gone so far. Not that I'm into that, because I've not followed a lot of processes, but, so I just wanted to clarify. And if I didn't mean to say it like, no, you can't do that, and I shouldn't have responded that way, so I wanted to just clarify that.
Appreciate
So-
the clarification.
So it's more like, I want your input. That's what I'm looking for, is your input. But I don't know, and I should have said, I don't know, as opposed to just saying no. I can't see it working where any commission member who wants to be part of our process in evaluating a consultant or working with a consultant can do that. That's not, I don't see how that works real well. So that's what I responded to, and I'm sorry if I said it in a way that was anything less than that, you know,
And
but that's what I
think
meant.
the spirit of what we're all saying is that we want to be informed enough that we can stay effective and give our input, even if it's not in lockstep with
I
the
got
rest
that.
of the
And
council.
I feel
guess.
that when the comment was made last time during member
Comments.
comments, there was also a comment requesting that we see the responses and we hear what the responses are, and it is now many meetings later and we still have not seen a response.
It's,
So
I don't know about
forgive
many,
me for
but
feeling like I appreciate the words that you want to work with the Conservation Commission, and I appreciate even more the action behind it.
I'll make sure that I understand.
Appreciate
And that's a
that.
very good and valid point.
And we are new as chairs and new as selectmen, and we are all learning as we go along. So I appreciate the
Thank you.
dialogue
Good.
and the grace as we learn. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have member comment. Or
I thought she was going to make a motion to
To
adjourn. Any comments?
Sorry about that. But, well, this may not be member comment, but it is a question that comes up since we're not meeting until September, and there is a lot of work to put together. There's this whole thing for Westford Road to present to the Board of Selectmen, which I don't know is they are gonna be able to hold off UI too many months. So, I need help.
I volunteer to support you on that effort. So just so I have clarification, did we get the feedback from legal on the letter?
Not yet.
Okay,
It
so,
hasn't come back.
maybe Mika can nudge legal to hurry that up. I don't know how long ago we requested it.
It was only a day ago.
Oh, okay, so. All right, fine, give me
So
2
he
days.
doesn't have to nudge quite yet.
Nudge next week. So, no, I know, because it's pending. We want, we want to try to protect our town as much as we can. So, Barbara, why don't we connect with Allison and request to be on the next Board of Selectmen meeting, provided that it's not in 2 days, and to present the letter and the purpose.
If we do that, but as Mika mentioned, it would be good to have the whole application, including the letter. Or
So
we
I
can do the letter
I can help
alone
you try to
and
develop
then.
the materials as well.
August
It's fine.
14th.
This
is
looks
the
like a
next-
Yeah.
subcommittee right here.
Okay, subcommittee.
Don't quote the number. Don't meet together, talk on email.
3 of us.
And I have
3 of us
another
can meet.
Okay, just check.
I have another question.
4 of us cannot.
But
You're not invited.
You
in
can
terms
do-
of the thank you notes, we don't need any, we can just send them out and not have everyone agree on what we thank them for, right? We don't have to have another meeting to send them, right? We're just gonna write thank you notes,
Thank you for
thank you
your
these
support.
people.
We were successful. We appreciate it.
Yes, okay,
Really
yes.
I'll email the text around and
Okay.
make sure everyone's comfortable with it.
Okay.
From
Sounds
your,
good.
from your new email address? I'll create everyone's new email address. How about that?
Okay.
It's a hard pass right there. Far too many of them. Any other member comments?
Motion to adjourn.
Rachel,
No seconds.
Oh, I thought Kathy said it.
There's no seconds, we'll
No,
hear
I
forever.
can't.
I know.
I second.
So I seconded.
Diana